concerned?
Well, it wouldn't be a Monday morning unless Louis was concerned about something. There's this thing hanging out there. Our kids can no longer afford it.
We should stand by every
This
word.
is the guy who needed our help 4 years ago, Susan.
He's like waiting around to see what we're doing.
And she got behind your back.
Now, you see what I mean? It grabs you right off the bat. You will just smell it.
Just got off.
Imagine being the most powerful person in the country, with the entire world watching your every move, yet discovering that the hardest battle you face has nothing to do with war, politics, or foreign enemies. Instead, it is about protecting the woman you love while trying to convince millions of people that your personal life does not make you any less capable of leading a nation. This is the story of Andrew Shepard, the President of the United States, a man who has everything a person could dream of: power, influence, respect, and a place in history, but who is about to learn that even the President cannot escape the complications of love, jealousy, public opinion, and political ambition. Welcome to The American President, a romantic political drama released in 1995, directed by Rob Reiner and written by Aaron Sorkin. The film stars Michael Douglas as President Andrew Shepard, Annette Bening as Sidney Ellen Wade, and Martin Sheen as A.J. McInerney, the President's close friend and chief of staff. Made on a budget of approximately $62 million, the movie combines romance, political strategy, and sharp dialogue to tell a story about what happens when the private life of the most public person in America suddenly becomes everyone's business. If you enjoy thoughtful movie stories with romance, political tension, and powerful characters, make sure to follow the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. The story begins inside the White House, where President Andrew Shepard is preparing for the difficult reality of governing the United States. Unlike many fictional presidents portrayed as larger-than-life heroes, Andrew is presented as an intelligent, calm, and relatively ordinary man who happens to hold one of the most powerful positions in the world. He is a widower raising his young daughter Lucy while attempting to balance the responsibilities of the presidency with the demands of being a father. His wife died several years earlier, and since then Andrew's life has revolved around his daughter and his career. He has managed to keep his personal life mostly private, but that privacy is about to disappear. Andrew is also facing another major challenge. His first term is moving forward, and with the next election approaching, every decision he makes is being examined by political opponents who are eager to find a weakness they can exploit. At the center of Andrew's professional world is his close friend and chief of staff, A.J. McInerney. A.J. is not simply another political advisor. He is one of the few people who can speak honestly to the president, even when Andrew does not want to hear the truth. Their relationship is built on years of friendship, trust, and political experience. A.J. understands that the presidency is not just about making good decisions. It is also about knowing how those decisions will be perceived by the public. Every speech, every photograph, and every relationship can become a political weapon. While Andrew is focused on governing the country, A.J. is constantly thinking several steps ahead, trying to protect the president from the attacks that inevitably come with the job. Andrew's personal life changes when he meets Sydney Ellen Wade, an environmental lobbyist who arrives in Washington to fight for legislation that would protect large areas of land from development. Sydney is intelligent, confident, and completely comfortable challenging powerful people. She is not impressed simply because Andrew is the president. Instead, she treats him like a normal human being, and that immediately makes her different from almost everyone else in his life. Sydney has her own beliefs, her own career, and her own reasons for being in Washington. She is determined to convince the administration to support an environmental bill that she believes is important, and she is prepared to fight for it. When Andrew first meets Sydney, their relationship begins in a professional setting, but there is an immediate sense of attraction between them. Andrew is fascinated by her confidence and intelligence, while Sydney is drawn to the fact that behind the title of president is a thoughtful man who is genuinely interested in her ideas. Their conversations are not simply about politics. They begin to discover that they enjoy each other's company. For Andrew, this is something unexpected. He has spent years living under intense public scrutiny, and he has become accustomed to people seeing him as the president rather than as Andrew Shepherd. Sydney, however, sees the man behind the office. That makes their connection feel real to him, but it also creates a serious problem because Andrew knows that dating someone in his position is never a simple private matter. As their relationship slowly develops, Andrew finds himself facing a conflict between his heart and his responsibilities. He wants to spend time with Sydney, but he knows that every move he makes can become a headline. Sydney is also aware that becoming involved with the president could completely change her life. She has spent years building her career and reputation, and suddenly she is being pulled into a world where photographers, journalists, political opponents, and strangers can all have opinions about her. Yet despite the risks, the two continue to see each other. The relationship becomes more serious, and Andrew begins to realize that he is genuinely falling in love with Sydney. For the first time since losing his wife, he allows himself to imagine a future with another woman. But the White House is not an ordinary place for romance. Andrew cannot simply take Sydney to a restaurant without considering security. He cannot walk with her in public without worrying about cameras. Even their private conversations can become political ammunition if someone decides to expose them. The president's personal life is no longer completely his own. At the same time, Andrew's political opponents are searching for an opportunity to damage his reputation. Among his most aggressive opponents is Senator Bob Rumson, a Republican politician who understands that attacking the president personally can sometimes be more effective than challenging him on policy. Rumson begins looking for ways to turn Andrew's relationship with Sydney into a political issue. Sydney has a past that can easily be twisted by someone determined to create a scandal. Her work as an environmental lobbyist is also something that can be used to suggest that Andrew is allowing his personal relationship to influence government policy. The danger becomes obvious when the media begins to notice Andrew and Sydney together. What might be considered a normal romantic relationship for an ordinary person suddenly becomes a national story. Newspapers and television programs begin asking questions about who Sydney is, why the president is dating her, and whether her presence in the White House represents a conflict of interest. Andrew realizes that the woman he cares about is being pulled into a political storm that she never asked for. Yet, instead of immediately ending the relationship, Andrew decides that Sydney is worth fighting for. He believes that being president should not mean giving up every possibility of happiness. He also believes that the American people deserve a leader who can make decisions based on principles rather than fear. But politics rarely rewards honesty without a price. Every choice Andrew makes creates another opportunity for his opponents to attack him. The situation becomes even more complicated when Andrew discovers that political strategy may require him to make decisions that affect Sydney directly. As president, he must consider the bigger picture. He has to think about legislation, public opinion, national security, and his chances of winning another term. As a man, however, he wants to protect the woman he loves. These two sides of his life begin to collide, forcing Andrew to confront the central question of his presidency. Can he remain true to his principles while surviving the ruthless world of American politics? Andrew's greatest challenge is not simply defeating his political enemies. It is proving that courage in politics means more than winning elections. Sometimes it means standing up for what you believe in, even when doing so could cost you power. And as the attacks against him become more personal, Andrew will soon have to decide whether he is willing to fight back, not only for his presidency, but for the principles he claims to represent. The pressure surrounding President Andrew Shepard continues to grow as his relationship with Sydney Ellen Wade becomes increasingly difficult to keep private. What began as a personal connection between two people is now becoming a subject of national interest, and Andrew quickly discovers that the moment a president becomes emotionally involved with someone, the relationship can be transformed into a political weapon. Sydney has spent her career fighting for environmental causes, and she understands Washington politics well enough to know that her connection to Andrew could damage both of them. Still, neither of them is willing to simply walk away from what they have found together. Inside the White House, Andrew's closest advisors are becoming increasingly concerned about the consequences. A.J. McInerney, the president's chief of staff and longtime friend, understands Andrew better than almost anyone. He knows that Andrew is not looking for a temporary romance or a distraction from his responsibilities. Andrew genuinely cares about Sydney, and that makes the situation much more complicated. AJ is worried that Andrew's emotions may cause him to make decisions that could hurt his presidency, especially with the next election getting closer. He constantly reminds Andrew that the president does not have the luxury of living like an ordinary citizen. Every personal choice can have professional consequences. Andrew, however, refuses to believe that being president means he has to stop being human. He has already sacrificed a great deal for his position. He lost his wife, raised his daughter while carrying the weight of the presidency, and spent years living under the constant attention of the public. Now, for the first time in a long while, he has found someone who makes him happy. Sydney does not treat him as a symbol or a political celebrity. She challenges him, disagrees with him, and speaks her mind. Andrew appreciates that honesty because it gives him something he rarely receives from people around him. Sydney is also beginning to understand how complicated Andrew's life truly is. Being with him means accepting a level of attention that she never experienced before. She knows that political opponents may investigate her past, journalists may examine every detail of her life, and strangers may judge her based on rumors rather than reality. Yet she continues to spend time with Andrew because she believes there is something genuine between them. The two begin to form a relationship that feels increasingly serious, even though neither of them can predict where it will lead. While Andrew and Sydney grow closer, Senator Bob Rumson sees an opportunity. Rumson is a skilled politician who understands how easily public opinion can be influenced. He knows that directly attacking Andrew's policies may not be enough to hurt him. Instead, he begins focusing on the president's personal relationship. Sydney's environmental activism gives Rumson another angle. He can suggest that Andrew is allowing a woman he is dating to influence government policy, creating the appearance of corruption or favoritism, even if there is no actual wrongdoing. Rumson's strategy is simple but effective. He does not need to prove that Andrew has broken the law. He only needs to create doubt in the minds of voters. In politics, perception can sometimes be more powerful than facts. If people begin believing that Andrew is making presidential decisions because of his relationship with Sydney, then his credibility could suffer. Rumson understands this and begins preparing a campaign that will put Andrew under enormous pressure. Andrew's administration is also dealing with important legislation. Sydney is lobbying for a major environmental bill that would protect thousands of acres of land from development. The proposal has strong opposition from powerful interests, and passing it will require political courage. Andrew supports the basic idea behind the legislation, but he must consider the political cost of taking such a position. His advisers warn him that the bill could upset important voters and create problems during the upcoming election. For Andrew, this becomes a difficult test. If he supports the bill, his opponents can claim that Sydney influenced his decision. If he refuses to support it, he risks abandoning a policy that he personally believes is important. The situation demonstrates the impossible position in which he finds himself. Even when he tries to make a decision based on principle, his relationship with Sydney creates suspicion. AJ tries to help Andrew understand the political reality. He knows that the president has to think about more than what is morally right in the moment. Andrew must consider how his actions affect the country, his administration, and his ability to continue serving the public. But AJ also recognizes that Andrew is becoming emotionally invested in Sydney. The two friends begin to disagree over how the situation should be handled. Andrew believes that he should be able to live according to his principles. He does not want to become the kind of politician who abandons his beliefs simply because an opponent might criticize him. AJ, on the other hand, understands that politics is often about choosing between imperfect options. He worries that Andrew's idealism could make him vulnerable to attacks from people who do not share his sense of responsibility. The tension becomes even stronger when Andrew's daughter Lucy becomes part of the situation. Andrew is not only a president but also a father. He has to consider how his relationship with Sydney will affect his daughter. Lucy has already experienced the loss of her mother, and Andrew wants to protect her from unnecessary emotional pressure. Sydney understands that Lucy is the most important person in Andrew's life, and she approaches their relationship carefully. The connection between Sydney and Lucy develops in a natural way. Sydney does not attempt to replace Lucy's mother, nor does she force herself into the family. Instead, she treats Lucy with respect and kindness. This makes Andrew even more attached to Sydney because he sees that she genuinely cares about the people he loves. For Andrew, the relationship is no longer simply about romance. He begins imagining the possibility of Sydney becoming a permanent part of his life. But outside the White House, the political storm is getting worse. Rumson's attacks begin to focus on Sydney's past, and the media becomes increasingly interested in her private life. Instead of discussing her environmental work, journalists start asking questions about her personal history. The president's relationship is slowly being transformed into a public controversy. Sydney is frustrated because she knows that the real issue is not her character, but the political advantage her opponents can gain by attacking her. Andrew begins to realize that the attacks are not going to stop on their own. If he remains silent, Rumson may control the narrative. If he fights back, he risks making the controversy even bigger. His advisers urge caution, but Andrew is becoming increasingly angry. He knows that the attacks against Sydney are unfair, yet responding emotionally could create an even larger political disaster. The situation forces Andrew to confront a painful reality. His enemies do not need to defeat him through policy debates. They can attack the people closest to him instead. Sydney becomes a target simply because she is connected to him. Andrew starts to wonder whether his decision to pursue the relationship has placed her in unnecessary danger. Sydney, meanwhile, begins to question whether she can continue living under this kind of pressure. She loves Andrew, but she does not want to become the reason he loses his ability to govern effectively. She also does not want her entire identity to be reduced to the title of the president's girlfriend. She has spent years developing her own career and fighting for causes she believes in, and she fears that the relationship may erase all of that. The two finally have to confront the reality that their relationship is no longer private. Their feelings are real, but so are the consequences of being together. Andrew wants to protect Sydney, while Sydney wants to protect Andrew from the political damage their relationship could cause. Both are beginning to understand that love may be the easiest part of their situation. The real challenge will be surviving the world surrounding them. As Senator Rumson prepares to intensify his campaign against the president, Andrew faces a critical decision. He can continue playing the political game exactly as his advisers recommend, avoiding confrontation and hoping the controversy disappears, or he can stand up publicly for himself, for Sydney, and for the principles he believes in, even if doing so puts his presidency at greater risk. And soon Andrew will discover that the battle for his political future is about to become deeply personal. The political pressure surrounding President Andrew Shepherd reaches a new level as Senator Bob Rumson begins turning Sidney Ellen Wade into the center of a national controversy. Ramson understands that attacking Andrew directly may not be enough to weaken him, so instead he focuses on the woman closest to the president. Sydney's past is examined, her political work is questioned, and her relationship with Andrew is presented as evidence that the president may be allowing his personal feelings to influence his decisions. The accusations are carefully designed to create suspicion without necessarily needing proof. In Washington, sometimes the suggestion of wrongdoing can be almost as damaging as wrongdoing itself. Andrew watches the situation develop with growing frustration. He knows Sydney has done nothing wrong and he refuses to accept the idea that dating someone should make her a legitimate target for political attacks. But as president, Andrew cannot simply react like an ordinary citizen. His every response is measured, analyzed, and interpreted. If he becomes too defensive, his opponents can claim he is hiding something. If he remains silent, the public may believe the accusations. Andrew is caught between protecting someone he loves and maintaining the dignity of the office he holds. AJ McInerney tries to convince Andrew that the safest strategy is to stay focused on governing. He warns him that political controversies often disappear when politicians refuse to give them additional attention. Andrew, however, believes the attacks are becoming too personal to ignore. He is particularly angry that Sydney's character is being questioned simply because she is involved with him. AJ understands Andrew's feelings, but he also knows that the presidency is not a place where emotions can always guide decisions. Their disagreement reveals the growing tension between Andrew's personal beliefs and the political reality surrounding him. At the same time, Andrew's relationship with Sydney continues to deepen. Despite the chaos around them, they try to create moments where they can simply be together. When they are away from the cameras and political advisors, Andrew can temporarily forget that he is the president. Sydney can forget that every person she meets might be interested in her relationship with the most powerful man in America. Their conversations become more personal, and Andrew begins sharing parts of himself that he rarely reveals to others. Sydney sees the loneliness that exists behind Andrew's position. The president is surrounded by people every day, yet very few of them are able to speak to him as an equal. His staff members are constantly thinking about politics, security, and public image. His daughter loves him, but she is still a child who needs her father. Sydney is one of the few people who can challenge Andrew intellectually and emotionally without being afraid of his position. She reminds him that leadership does not require him to stop being human. But Sydney also begins to recognize the price of being close to him. Her own professional life is becoming overshadowed by the relationship. Instead of being recognized for her environmental work, she is increasingly known as the woman dating the president. The situation becomes frustrating because Sydney has spent years fighting for causes that matter to her, and now the public discussion is focused almost entirely on her personal life. Andrew tries to reassure her that the situation will eventually calm down. He believes that if they remain honest with each other, they can handle the pressure. But Sydney knows that politics rarely follows the rules of ordinary relationships. The president cannot simply ask the public to respect his privacy. His opponents have every incentive to keep the controversy alive, and the media has every reason to continue covering it. The situation becomes even more difficult when Andrew's political advisors begin calculating the possible damage caused by the environmental bill Sydney supports. The legislation is important to her, and Andrew personally believes that protecting the environment is the right thing to do. But the bill could cost him politically. His opponents can easily argue that he is supporting it because of Sydney rather than because of his own beliefs. Andrew knows that this accusation is unfair, but he also understands why people might believe it. The president now faces an uncomfortable choice. He can distance himself from the bill to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest, or he can support it and risk giving Ramson another weapon. Andrew's advisors strongly encourage him to think politically. They remind him that one piece of legislation is not worth sacrificing his entire presidency. But Andrew begins questioning whether winning another election is meaningful if he has to abandon the principles that brought him into politics in the first place. Meanwhile, Senator Ramson continues his campaign. He presents himself as a defender of traditional values and suggests that Andrew's relationship with Sydney reflects poor judgment. His speeches are carefully constructed to appeal to voters who may already be uncertain about the president. Ramson does not need to prove that Andrew is corrupt. He simply wants voters to question his character. Andrew becomes increasingly angry because he knows Ramson is deliberately manipulating the public. Yet he also understands that fighting back will require him to enter the same political game. He has to decide whether he will allow his opponent to define the story or whether he will finally respond directly. Inside the White House, the pressure begins affecting everyone. Andrew's staff becomes divided over how aggressively they should respond. Some believe that ignoring Ramson is the best approach, while others argue that the president must attack before the controversy grows. AJ is caught between his responsibility to protect Andrew politically and his friendship with him personally. The relationship between Andrew and AJ becomes strained as their arguments continue. Andrew feels that his closest advisor is treating his love life as a political problem rather than understanding what Sydney means to him. AJ, however, is trying to protect his friend from making decisions that could destroy everything he has worked for. Their conflict is painful because both men are acting out of loyalty, but they are approaching the situation from completely different perspectives. Andrew's daughter Lucy also becomes an important part of his emotional world. She has grown accustomed to life in the White House and understands that her father is constantly busy. She also recognizes that Sydney makes him happy. Andrew is careful about introducing Sydney into Lucy's life because he does not want to create confusion or make promises he cannot keep. But Lucy's acceptance of Sydney gives Andrew a sense of hope that the relationship could become something permanent. For Sydney, however, the political attacks are becoming harder to tolerate. She begins to wonder whether her relationship with Andrew is worth the sacrifices she is making. She never expected to become a political target, and she certainly never imagined that her personal history would become national news. She loves Andrew, but she also understands that staying with him could permanently change her life. The pressure eventually reaches a point where Andrew must confront the reality that he cannot protect everyone by simply remaining silent. Ramson has crossed a line, and Andrew realizes that avoiding the fight may only encourage further attacks. The president begins considering a response that will make his position clear, not only to Ramson, but to the entire country. Yet before Andrew can fully decide how to fight back, another problem emerges. His political advisor warned him that the next election is approaching rapidly, and every decision he makes from this point forward will influence his chances of winning. Andrew must now balance his responsibilities as president, his future as a politician, his role as a father, and his relationship with Sydney. The question is no longer whether Andrew loves Sydney. That much has become clear. The real question is whether he is willing to risk his political future for what he believes is right. As the controversy grows, Andrew begins to understand that leadership is not simply about avoiding difficult choices. Sometimes the most important decision is the one that carries the greatest personal cost. And when Senator Ramson pushes his attacks too far, the president finally realizes that the time for quietly managing a crisis may be over. Andrew Shepard is about to step into the political fight of his life. And this time, he will not be fighting only for his presidency. He will be fighting for his principles, his dignity, and the woman he refuses to let his enemies destroy. The situation between President Andrew Shepard and Senator Bob Ramson reaches a breaking point when the political attacks become impossible to ignore. Ramson has discovered that Andrew's relationship with Sydney is a vulnerable point, and he intends to exploit it for as long as possible. Instead of debating Andrew's policies directly, Ramson continues presenting the president as a man whose personal choices reveal something negative about his character. The strategy is calculated. and Andrew knows exactly what is happening. But knowing the strategy does not make it any easier to watch Sydney become the target of attacks simply because she is close to him. Andrew's advisors continue to urge him to remain calm. They believe that responding emotionally will only make the controversy worse. In their view, the president should focus on his work and allow the political storm to pass. But Andrew has begun to realize that staying silent is also a decision. Every time Ramson attacks Sydney and Andrew refuses to respond, the public is left with the impression that the accusations are going unanswered. Andrew understands that politics is often about controlling the story, and right now, Ramson is doing everything he can to control the story for him. Sydney is struggling with the same situation from a completely different perspective. She has never wanted to be involved in a political battle. Her career has always been based on environmental issues, and she believes in fighting for policies that can make a real difference. But now her professional life is being connected to her relationship with the president. The environmental legislation she supports is being treated as evidence that she has special influence over Andrew. She knows this is unfair, yet she also understands why the appearance of a conflict can be politically dangerous. Andrew tries to reassure Sydney that he knows the truth. He tells her that his support for environmental protection existed before he ever met her. But Sydney is not only worried about what Andrew believes. She is worried about what the public believes. She knows that political opponents do not need to prove anything beyond doubt. They only need to create enough uncertainty to make people question the president's judgment. Their relationship begins to suffer under the pressure. The two still care deeply about each other, but the constant political attacks make it difficult to enjoy their time together. Every romantic moment carries the possibility of becoming tomorrow's headline. Sydney starts to wonder whether Andrew can truly separate his personal feelings from his responsibilities. Andrew, meanwhile, believes that the attacks against Sydney are proof of how unfair politics can be. The president's daughter, Lucy, remains one of the few sources of normality in Andrew's life. Her presence reminds him that there is more to his work than elections and political battles. Andrew wants to be a good father, and he is careful not to allow the controversy surrounding Sydney to affect Lucy. At the same time, he knows that Lucy has become attached to Sydney. The relationship between them gives Andrew hope that Sydney could eventually become a meaningful part of their family. But before Andrew can think about the future, he must deal with the present crisis. The environmental bill becomes increasingly important. Andrew has the opportunity to support legislation that could protect a significant amount of land, but his advisors warn him about the political consequences. The bill is unpopular with some powerful groups, and supporting it could cost the administration valuable political support. Andrew must decide whether he is willing to risk his popularity for something he believes is right. AJ argues that the timing is terrible. With the election approaching and Ramson already attacking the administration, Andrew cannot afford to create another political problem. He believes the president should focus on issues that have a better chance of succeeding. But Andrew sees the situation differently. If he refuses to support the bill simply because Sydney is involved in the issue, then he is allowing Ramson to influence his decisions. Andrew does not want to make choices based on fear. The disagreement between Andrew and AJ becomes more intense. AJ reminds Andrew that being president means understanding consequences. Andrew responds that being president also means having the courage to stand for something. Their argument represents a larger conflict within Andrew himself. One side of him wants to protect his presidency, while another wants to remain true to the values he believes in. Meanwhile, Ramson continues escalating his attacks. His political campaign becomes increasingly personal, and Andrew finally realizes that the senator's strategy is not going to stop on its own. Ramson believes that Andrew is vulnerable because he cares about Sydney, and he intends to use that weakness against him. Andrew's frustration finally reaches its limit when he sees how the attacks are affecting Sydney. She is being judged by people who have never met her and criticized for decisions that have nothing to do with her character. Andrew knows that Sydney entered his life as an independent woman with her own career and beliefs. He refuses to watch her identity disappear beneath a political scandal. The president begins to understand that he has been making a mistake by allowing his opponents to set the rules of the fight. He has been trying to remain above the political attacks, believing that the dignity of his office will protect him. But Ramson has shown that political opponents do not always respect those boundaries. Andrew decides that the time has come to respond. His staff is surprised when he begins preparing for a much stronger political strategy. The president is no longer interested in simply defending himself against accusations. He wants to expose the hypocrisy behind Ramson's attacks. Andrew believes that if Ramson is going to question his character, then Ramson should be prepared to have his own political record examined. But Andrew also knows that there is a risk. A presidential response can easily become a national spectacle. If he loses control of his emotions, the entire situation could make him look weak. If he attacks too aggressively, voters may believe that he is using the power of the presidency for personal reasons. Andrew must therefore find a way to defend himself without allowing the controversy to define his administration. Sydney becomes increasingly concerned about what Andrew is planning. She does not want him to destroy his political career because of her. She tells him that she never expected their relationship to become this complicated and that she does not want to be responsible for the problems he is facing. Andrew, however, refuses to see her as a problem. He believes that the real problem is a political system that allows people to attack others simply because they are afraid of losing power. Their conversation reveals how deeply Andrew's feelings have developed. He is no longer thinking about Sydney as someone he is simply dating. He sees her as someone he wants in his life, someone whose presence has changed him. For the first time since becoming a widower, Andrew is allowing himself to imagine happiness again. But love does not make the political consequences disappear. As the election draws closer, Andrew's opponents become more aggressive. Ramson's campaign begins suggesting that the president is weak, distracted, and unable to separate his personal life from his responsibilities. The accusations begin reaching millions of Americans, and Andrew's administration must respond. Inside the White House, AJ and the rest of the staff prepare for what could become the most important political confrontation of the president's career. Andrew knows that the next move he makes could determine not only his future but also the future of the legislation he supports. Then Andrew receives an opportunity to confront the issue publicly. He prepares himself to speak directly to the American people. But this time he is not going to hide behind carefully written political statements. He wants to explain what he believes the presidency should represent. He wants to remind the public that leadership is about more than polls and elections. It is about making difficult decisions and accepting responsibility for them. Andrew also knows that if he speaks honestly, he may lose political support. But he has reached a point where winning at any cost no longer feels like victory. The president is now ready to fight back against Senator Ramson, but the battle will test everything he has learned about power, politics, love, and leadership. And when Andrew finally decides to confront his opponent, the country is about to witness a very different side of the man sitting behind the desk in the Oval Office. The political battle between President Andrew Shepard and Senator Bob Lumsden now reaches a critical stage. Andrew has spent much of his presidency trying to remain calm and dignified in the face of political attacks, but Lumsden's strategy has become increasingly personal. Instead of challenging Andrew's policies, Lumsden continues to question his character and judgment, using the president's relationship with Sydney as an opportunity to create doubt among voters. Andrew knows that if he continues allowing his opponent to control the conversation, the controversy could eventually overshadow everything his administration has accomplished. Inside the White House, Andrew and his advisors prepare for the next stage of the fight. A.J. McInerney is still concerned that Andrew's emotions may lead him into a dangerous political confrontation. A.J. has spent years protecting his friend from the realities of Washington politics, and he knows that the president's position gives him enormous power, but also makes every mistake far more damaging. Andrew, however, has reached a point where he no longer wants to play defense. He believes that Rumson has gone too far, and he is determined to respond. The most important issue now is the environmental legislation supported by Sydney. The bill represents a significant opportunity to protect land from development, but it also carries political risks. Powerful groups oppose the proposal, and some members of Congress are reluctant to support it. Andrew understands that passing the bill will require political courage, especially at a time when his opponents are already accusing him of allowing Sydney to influence his decisions. For Andrew, the situation is deeply frustrating. He knows that if he supports the legislation, Rumson will claim that Sydney is controlling the White House. If he abandons it, Andrew will be compromising his own principles simply to avoid criticism. The president begins to realize that there may be no decision that satisfies everyone. Whatever he does, someone will accuse him of being motivated by something other than his responsibility to the country. Andrew finally decides that he cannot allow fear to determine his actions. If he truly believes the environmental bill is important, then he must support it for the right reasons. He refuses to let Rumson dictate his policies simply because the senator has discovered a convenient political attack. Andrew's decision demonstrates a fundamental change in his attitude. He is no longer willing to sacrifice his beliefs just to make his opponent's job easier. At the same time, Andrew's relationship with Sydney is becoming more emotionally complicated. Sydney realizes that Andrew is willing to defend her, but she worries about the cost. She does not want to become the reason the president loses public support or fails to accomplish the goals he was elected to pursue. Sydney has always been independent, and she does not want her relationship with Andrew to become a burden that damages his career. Andrew tries to explain that she is not responsible for the attacks against him. The problem is not their relationship itself. The problem is that his political opponents are willing to use anything they can find to weaken him. Andrew believes that ending the relationship would only prove that Rumson's strategy works. He does not want to live in a country where politicians can destroy someone's personal happiness simply by threatening them with political consequences. Sydney appreciates Andrew's confidence, but she also understands that love does not eliminate responsibility. She knows that Andrew has millions of people depending on him, and she does not want him to forget that. Their conversations become a balance between affection and realism. Both understand that their relationship is important, but both also recognize that the presidency carries responsibilities that cannot be ignored. Meanwhile, Senator Rumson continues building his political campaign around the idea that Andrew is weak. Rumson's speeches are designed to create an image of a president who has lost focus. He suggests that Andrew's personal life has distracted him from the problems facing the country. The attacks are effective because they are simple enough for voters to understand, even if they do not accurately represent the reality inside the White House. Andrew knows that he must respond with something stronger than a simple denial. He needs to remind the public what his presidency stands for. Rather than allowing Rumson to define him, Andrew decides to take control of the narrative. When Andrew finally confronts the political situation directly, his response is powerful because he does not simply defend his relationship with Sydney. He challenges the entire idea that politics should be based on personal attacks and fear. He makes it clear that he will not allow his opponents to turn his private life into an excuse for avoiding serious discussions about the country's future. Andrew's words begin changing the atmosphere around him. His staff sees that the president is no longer reacting to events. He is taking control. AJ, who has been worried about the risks, begins to recognize that Andrew's decision is based on something deeper than emotion. The president is fighting for the kind of leader he wants to be, but the political consequences are still real. Andrew's approval ratings and election prospects remain important concerns. His advisers know that voters can be unpredictable, and a powerful speech today does not guarantee victory tomorrow. The president must still deal with Congress, public opinion, and the approaching election. Even if he wins the argument against Rumson, he still has to convince the American people that his leadership deserves another term. The conflict also forces Andrew to examine his own priorities. He begins thinking about what kind of legacy he wants to leave behind. Does he want to be remembered as a president who carefully avoided every political risk, or as a leader who stood for his beliefs even when doing so was difficult? Andrew realizes that political success without personal integrity would mean very little to him. This realization affects his relationship with AJ as well. Their friendship has been tested by the pressure surrounding the presidency, but Andrew understands that AJ's concerns have always come from loyalty. AJ may disagree with Andrew's choices, but he has spent years protecting him. Their disagreements are not about whether they care about each other. They are about what they believe Andrew needs to survive in Washington. Eventually, the two men begin to understand each other's positions. AJ recognizes that Andrew cannot be protected from every political attack, and Andrew realizes that AJ has been trying to prepare him for the consequences of his choices. Their friendship becomes stronger because they are finally able to speak honestly about the situation. While Andrew fights his political battle, Sydney is forced to make an important decision of her own. She must decide whether she can continue standing beside him despite everything that comes with being connected to the president. The constant attention, the personal attacks, and the possibility of becoming a political target are not easy to accept. Sydney knows that if she stays with Andrew, her life will never return to the way it was before they met. Yet she also knows that what they have is real. The relationship between Andrew and Sydney reaches a point where both must stop thinking only about the immediate crisis and consider the future. Andrew has already shown that he is willing to defend her publicly, but Sydney needs to know whether there is a real place for her in his life beyond the presidency and the election. Andrew's position makes the question extremely complicated. He cannot promise Sydney an ordinary life. Even if they marry, she will always be connected to the most powerful political office in the country. Every decision they make will be examined by the public. But Andrew can promise her something more important: honesty. As the political battle continues, Andrew's actions begin to demonstrate that he is prepared to accept the consequences of his choices. He will not allow Rumson to decide who he loves, and he will not abandon important principles simply because they are politically inconvenient. But Rumson is not finished. The senator realizes that Andrew's confidence could actually strengthen him politically, so he prepares to launch another attack. This time, the stakes are even higher. Rumson wants to force Andrew into a position where he must choose between protecting his personal life and protecting his political future. Andrew is about to face the most difficult test of his presidency. He has power, but power alone cannot solve the problem. He has advisers, but they cannot make the decision for him. He has Sydney's love, but even love cannot protect them from the consequences of public life. Ultimately, Andrew must decide what kind of man and what kind of president he wants to be. And as the election approaches, the battle between Andrew Shepherd and Bob Rumson is no longer simply a political contest. It has become a fight over the meaning of leadership itself. Andrew now understands that the greatest danger is not losing an election. The greatest danger is winning while becoming someone he no longer recognizes. The battle between President Andrew Shepard and Senator Bob Rumson continues to intensify, but Andrew is no longer willing to let fear control his decisions. The more Rumson attacks him, the more determined Andrew becomes to prove that the presidency should be about leadership rather than political manipulation. However, standing up for his beliefs comes with consequences, and Andrew soon realizes that every action he takes could affect not only his political future, but also the people closest to him. The environmental legislation remains one of the biggest challenges facing the administration. Andrew believes the bill is important, but the political situation surrounding it has become complicated by his relationship with Sydney. Rumson continues, suggesting that Andrew is supporting the legislation because Sydney wants him to, rather than because he genuinely believes in it. Andrew knows the accusation is false, but he also understands that repeating the truth will not necessarily make the controversy disappear. Sydney is increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. She never wanted her relationship with Andrew to become a national political issue, and she certainly did not want her environmental work to be used as ammunition against him. She begins questioning whether her presence in Andrew's life is making his responsibilities more difficult. Sydney knows that Andrew has spent years working toward his political goals, and she does not want to be responsible for damaging everything he has achieved. Andrew refuses to blame Sydney. He believes that the problem is not their relationship, but the political culture surrounding them. In his eyes, Rumson is trying to convince voters that a president cannot have a personal life without compromising his judgment. Andrew strongly disagrees. He believes that being a good leader and being a human being are not mutually exclusive. But Sydney is not convinced that the situation can be solved so easily. She understands Andrew's position, yet she also sees the consequences of his decisions. Every time the president publicly defends her, the controversy becomes larger. Every time he supports an issue she cares about, his opponents accuse him of favoritism. Sydney begins to realize that even if Andrew is acting with complete honesty, the appearance of a conflict may still be enough to hurt him. The pressure eventually begins affecting their relationship. Andrew wants Sydney to trust that he can handle the political attacks, while Sydney wants Andrew to understand that she is worried about his future. Their conversations become more serious as they try to determine whether their relationship can survive the unusual circumstances surrounding them. At the same time, Andrew's political team continues preparing for the upcoming election. They understand that Rumson is attempting to weaken the president before the campaign reaches its most important stage. If Andrew allows his opponent to define him as a weak or distracted leader, it could have serious consequences. The administration therefore begins focusing on Andrew's accomplishments and his vision for the country. Andrew, however, is becoming increasingly frustrated with the idea that everything must be measured by election results. He knows that political success is important, but he does not want every decision to be based on whether it will increase his popularity. He believes that the president's responsibility is to make difficult decisions for the future, even when those decisions are unpopular in the present. This belief becomes especially important when Andrew considers how to respond to Rumson's attacks. He could choose to fight back with the same kind of personal politics, exposing weaknesses in Rumson's own record. His advisers know that such a strategy could be effective, but Andrew hesitates. He does not want to become the very kind of politician he is criticizing. AJ understands Andrew's hesitation, but he also knows that politics is rarely a clean battle. If Andrew refuses to fight, Rumson may continue attacking without facing consequences. AJ tells Andrew that defending his principles does not necessarily mean refusing to defend himself. Sometimes standing for something requires confronting the people who are trying to destroy it. Their conversation helps Andrew see the situation differently. He realizes that remaining silent is not always the moral choice. If he allows false accusations to spread, he is not protecting his dignity. He is simply giving his opponents more power. Andrew begins preparing to make his position clear, but he wants to do it on his own terms. Meanwhile, Sydney faces her own emotional struggle. She has fallen deeply in love with Andrew, but she knows that loving the president is unlike loving an ordinary man. Andrew cannot simply disappear for a weekend or enjoy a quiet dinner without security concerns and public attention. His schedule is controlled by national responsibilities, and his decisions can affect millions of people. Despite all of this, Sydney sees something in Andrew that she values more than his position. She sees a man who genuinely wants to do good. She sees his concern for his daughter, his friendship with AJ, and his desire to make the right choices, even when the political consequences are difficult. The more she understands him, the harder it becomes for her to imagine walking away. Andrew also becomes more open about his feelings. He knows that Sydney has taken a tremendous risk by becoming involved with him, and he wants her to know that he does not take her presence for granted. He tells her, in his own way, that she has brought something back into his life that he thought he had lost forever. Their relationship begins moving beyond the excitement of a new romance and into something much more serious. They are no longer simply asking whether they enjoy being together. They are asking whether they can build a future despite the enormous obstacles in their way. The political pressure, however, refuses to disappear. Rumsen continues making public statements designed to question Andrew's character. He suggests that the president is allowing personal relationships to interfere with national responsibilities. The attacks become more aggressive, and Andrew finally reaches the point where he cannot ignore them. The president decides that he will respond directly. Instead of allowing his advisors to create another carefully controlled political statement, Andrew chooses to confront the issue with honesty. He understands that his words could become one of the defining moments of his presidency. If he speaks too aggressively, he could appear defensive. If he is too cautious, Rumsen could continue controlling the narrative. Andrew prepares himself for a public confrontation that will require him to defend not only his relationship with Sydney, but also his understanding of what the presidency should represent. When the moment arrives, Andrew refuses to allow himself to be intimidated. The pressure surrounding President Andrew Shepard continues to build as the election draws closer. Andrew has already made several decisions that could have been avoided if his only goal were to protect his political future. He has stood by Sydney, defended his principles, and refused to allow Senator Bob Rumsen to dictate his actions. But now the consequences of those decisions are becoming clearer. The president's political team is watching the polls, studying public opinion, and trying to determine whether Andrew's approach will help or hurt him when voters finally make their decision. Andrew, however, is becoming less interested in the numbers. The events of the past few weeks have changed his understanding of what matters. He entered the presidency believing that he could balance political strategy with personal integrity. But his relationship with Sydney has forced him to confront the reality that those two things will not always exist comfortably together. Every time he chooses what he believes is right, someone warns him about the political consequences. Every time he tries to protect his private life, his opponents find another way to attack him. Sydney is also beginning to understand that her relationship with Andrew has changed the direction of her own life. Before meeting him, she was focused entirely on her environmental work. She was confident in her career and comfortable with her independence. Now she is living in a world where her private choices are constantly discussed by people who have never met her. The attention is exhausting, and there are moments when she wonders whether she made a mistake by becoming involved with the president. Yet whenever she considers leaving, she remembers why she fell in love with him. Andrew is not the powerful political figure that the media presents to the public. In private, he is a thoughtful man who worries about his daughter, respects his friends, and genuinely wants to make decisions that improve the country. Sydney sees the pressure he carries every day, and she realizes that his willingness to stand up for her is not an act designed to win votes. It comes from a sincere belief that the people he loves deserve to be treated with dignity. Andrew's relationship with his daughter Lucy also becomes increasingly important. Lucy has always been at the center of his life, especially since the death of her mother. Andrew is careful to make sure that his personal choices never make Lucy feel forgotten or replaced. Sydney understands this completely and never tries to take the place of Lucy's mother. Instead, she gradually becomes someone Lucy can trust and enjoy spending time with. For Andrew, seeing Sydney and Lucy together gives him a feeling of happiness that he has not experienced since losing his wife. It makes him imagine a future beyond the presidency. He begins to realize that political power is temporary, but family and personal relationships can last much longer. The possibility of building a life with Sydney becomes more meaningful to him as the political battle around them grows more intense. At the same time, Senator Rumson continues his campaign against the president. He believes Andrew has made himself vulnerable by allowing his personal life to become public. Rumson's political strategy is based on the assumption that voters will eventually punish Andrew for his relationship with Sydney. He continues portraying the president as someone who has lost focus and is willing to compromise his responsibilities for personal happiness. But Rumson's strategy begins to face resistance. The public is not responding exactly as he expected. Andrew's willingness to defend Sydney and support the environmental legislation has started changing the way some people view him. Instead of appearing weak, Andrew increasingly looks like a leader who is willing to take responsibility for his decisions. His honesty begins to work in his favor. The situation demonstrates an important reality of politics. Public opinion can change quickly. The same story that once looked like a weakness can eventually become a strength if the people involved handle it with confidence. Andrew has stopped apologizing for his personal life, and that confidence makes it harder for his opponents to portray him as ashamed or dishonest. Still, the political battle is far from over. Andrew's advisors warn him that Rumson may have more attacks prepared. The senator has spent considerable time building his campaign around the idea that the president is vulnerable, and he is unlikely to give up simply because the public response is changing. Andrew knows that his opponent will continue searching for opportunities to create controversy. AJ remains one of the most important people helping Andrew navigate the crisis. Their friendship has been tested throughout the situation, but the two men have become better at understanding each other's positions. AJ still worries about Andrew's political future, but he also recognizes that his friend cannot be forced to live according to someone else's expectations. The two discuss the possibility that Andrew's decisions may cost him the election. AJ knows that this is a real possibility, but he also understands that Andrew has reached a point where he would rather lose honestly than win by abandoning everything he believes in. Their conversation becomes less about political strategy and more about friendship. Andrew begins thinking about the legacy he wants to leave behind. He knows that presidents are remembered for major historical events, but he also believes that character matters. A leader's decisions during difficult moments can reveal more about him than any speech or campaign promise. For Andrew, this entire experience has become a test of character. He has been forced to choose between fear and courage, between political convenience and personal integrity. He has learned that protecting the people he loves may require him to take political risks. He has also discovered that love can make a person more vulnerable, but it can also make him stronger. Sydney, meanwhile, finally begins to accept that she cannot control how the public sees her. She can only control how she behaves. Instead of constantly worrying about every newspaper story or political attack, she decides to focus on the relationship itself. If Andrew is willing to accept the risks of being with her, then she must decide whether she is willing to accept them as well. The two begin to move forward together, but another major obstacle remains. Andrew must deal with the consequences of his political decisions. The environmental legislation has become a symbol of his presidency. Supporting it demonstrates his willingness to stand for his beliefs, but it also creates opposition from people who believe the president has made a political mistake. Andrew knows that the bill may not produce immediate results, but he believes that leadership requires thinking beyond the next election. This philosophy separates Andrew from Rumson. Rumson is focused on winning. Andrew is beginning to focus on what winning actually means. For Rumson, victory means defeating Andrew and gaining political power. For Andrew, victory means being able to look back at his presidency and know that he did not surrender his principles simply to remain in office. The difference between them becomes increasingly clear as the election approaches. Eventually, Andrew and Sydney have a serious conversation about their future. Sydney understands that Andrew may remain president for another term, and if that happens, their lives will continue under intense public scrutiny. She needs to know that Andrew sees her as more than someone who happens to be in his life during a difficult political moment. Andrew makes his feelings clear. He does not want Sydney to disappear when the election is over. He wants her to remain part of his life regardless of what happens politically. For the first time, their relationship feels less like a temporary romance and more like a genuine partnership. This emotional development gives Andrew a new sense of confidence. He no longer feels that he has to choose between being president and being a man in love. He understands that he can be both, as long as he accepts the responsibilities that come with each role. But the final political confrontation is approaching. Rumson prepares to make one more attempt to damage Andrew before the election. He believes that, if he can create enough fear and doubt, voters will turn against the president. Andrew's team prepares for the attack, knowing that the final days of a political campaign can be unpredictable. Andrew, however, is no longer afraid of Rumson. He has already faced the worst part of the controversy. He has watched someone he loves become a political target, defended his principles under pressure, and accepted the possibility that his choices could cost him his position. Now, whatever happens, he knows that he has made his decisions honestly. The president prepares to confront Rumson one final time. This time, Andrew will not simply defend himself. He will challenge the political tactics being used against him and remind the public that leadership should be based on ideas, courage, and responsibility, not fear, personal attacks, or manipulation. As the final confrontation approaches, Andrew understands that the election may determine whether he remains in the White House, but it will not determine the kind of man he is. That decision has already been made. The final stage of the political battle is now approaching, and President Andrew Shepard finds himself facing a challenge that is far more personal than any election campaign he has experienced before. Senator Bob Rumson has spent weeks attacking Andrew's character, questioning his judgment, and using his relationship with Sydney as a political weapon. But Andrew has changed during the crisis. At the beginning, he was concerned about how every decision might affect his presidency. Now, he has started to understand that leadership is not simply about protecting one's position. It is about having the courage to stand behind decisions even when the consequences are difficult. Inside the White House, Andrew's advisors are preparing for the final confrontation. The upcoming election has created an atmosphere of uncertainty, and everyone understands that the president's response to Rumson could influence voters. Andrew's political team wants him to remain disciplined and avoid giving his opponent another opportunity to attack. They know that one wrong statement could become the headline of the day, while a carefully chosen response could strengthen Andrew's position. But Andrew is no longer interested in simply surviving the campaign. He wants to make a clear statement about what he believes the presidency should represent. He has watched Rumson turn personal attacks into political strategy, and he believes the American people deserve better than that. Andrew understands that politics will always involve competition, but he does not believe that winning an election should require destroying another person's dignity. Sydney remains at the center of Andrew's thoughts. The political attacks have made her question whether she belongs in his life, but Andrew continues to reassure her that she is not a political problem. He tells her that he chose to be with her because of who she is, not because of what she could do for his career. Their relationship has survived the pressure because both of them have slowly learned that they cannot allow other people's opinions to determine their feelings. For Sydney, this is an important realization. She has spent so much time worrying about how the public sees her that she has almost forgotten to think about what she wants. She finally accepts that she cannot control the media, Senator Rumson, or the voters. The only thing she can control is whether she believes in the relationship she has chosen. Andrew's daughter Lucy also plays an important role in his decision making. Andrew's responsibility as a father has always influenced his choices, and he wants to make sure that his personal life does not create unnecessary pain for her. Sydney's relationship with Lucy has developed naturally, and Andrew sees that the two genuinely care about each other. This gives him confidence that his relationship with Sydney is not simply a temporary escape from the pressures of the presidency. At the same time, Andrew's becoming increasingly aware of the difference between himself and Rumson. The senator's campaign is based on attacking Andrew's character, while Andrew's response is increasingly focused on defending the principles behind his policies. Andrew does not want to win by becoming more aggressive than his opponent. He wants to win by showing the public that there is another way to lead. This becomes especially important when Andrew considers his position on the environmental legislation. Sydney's involvement has made the issue politically complicated, but Andrew refuses to abandon it simply to avoid criticism. He knows that supporting the bill could cost him politically, but he also believes that protecting the environment is an important responsibility. Andrew's decision creates tension within his political team. Some advisers believe that the president should focus on issues that are easier to defend during an election year. Others argue that Andrew's willingness to stand for difficult issues could actually strengthen his image as a principled leader. AJ understands both sides of the argument. He knows that politics is about timing, but he also knows that Andrew cannot be expected to abandon every principle whenever an election approaches. Their friendship allows AJ to speak honestly, and Andrew appreciates that honesty, even when it is difficult to hear. The relationship between the two men has changed significantly throughout the crisis. At first, AJ viewed Sydney as a potential political liability. He worried that Andrew's feelings would make him vulnerable. But as the situation developed, AJ began to see that Sydney was not making Andrew weaker. In some ways, she was reminding him why he wanted to lead in the first place. Andrew's personal happiness begins influencing his leadership in an unexpected way. Instead of distracting him, his relationship with Sydney forces him to think more deeply about the kind of country he wants to lead. He becomes more determined to stand for ideas rather than simply protect his political position. The final confrontation with Rumson finally arrives. Andrew is prepared to respond to the senator's attacks, but he refuses to allow the encounter to become another exchange of personal insults. Instead, he focuses on the larger issue. He challenges the idea that political opponents should be allowed to use fear and personal attacks as substitutes for serious debate. Andrew's response is powerful because he speaks with the confidence of someone who has already accepted the possibility of losing. He no longer needs to pretend that every decision is politically safe. He knows that he may face consequences, but he has decided that those consequences are worth accepting if he can remain true to his principles. Rumson attempts to continue his attacks, but Andrew's confidence makes the strategy increasingly ineffective. The senator expected the president to become defensive, but Andrew refuses to play that role. Instead, he turns the focus back toward the issues that actually matter. Andrew makes it clear that the presidency is not supposed to be a personal popularity contest. It is a position of responsibility. The person sitting in the Oval Office must make decisions that affect millions of people, and those decisions should be judged by their consequences, not by rumors about the president's personal life. This moment changes the atmosphere around the campaign. The public begins seeing the conflict differently. What originally appeared to be a scandal surrounding Andrew's relationship with Sydney now looks more like a political attack designed to distract voters from the real issues. Andrew's refusal to surrender to the pressure makes him appear stronger. The final days of the election campaign arrive, and President Andrew Shepherd is now facing the consequences of every decision he has made. The controversy surrounding Sydney has not disappeared completely, but the president has managed to survive the attacks without abandoning the principles he believes in. More importantly, he has discovered something about himself that he had forgotten after years of living under the pressure of the presidency. He has learned that being a leader does not mean giving up the right to be happy. Andrew's relationship with Sydney has become stronger because they have faced the worst moments together. At the beginning, their romance was exciting but uncertain. Neither of them knew whether it could survive the reality of Andrew's position, but the political attacks forced them to confront their feelings honestly. Sydney now understands that Andrew is willing to stand beside her, even when doing so creates political difficulties. Andrew, meanwhile, has realized that Sydney is not simply someone he loves. She is someone who challenges him to become a better man. The election campaign continues to move forward, but Andrew's focus has changed. Earlier, he was constantly worried about public opinion and the possibility of losing his position. Now he is more concerned about whether he has used his time in office responsibly. He knows that political power is temporary, and he has begun thinking about what his presidency will mean after he leaves the White House. This change is visible in the way Andrew approaches his final political decisions. He no longer wants to make choices simply because they are popular. He wants to make choices that reflect his beliefs. The environmental legislation remains an important example of this philosophy. Andrew understands that protecting the environment may not always be the easiest political position, but he believes that leaders have a responsibility to think about the future. Senator Rumson, however, is still determined to defeat him. Rumson believes that Andrew's relationship with Sydney has created a weakness that can still be exploited. He continues trying to convince voters that the president has become distracted by his personal life. But the strategy is losing its effectiveness. Andrew's public response has made it clear that he will not allow his personal relationships to be used as an excuse for avoiding serious political discussions. The more Rumson attacks, the more Andrew's character becomes visible to the public. Instead of appearing weak, he begins to look like a man who is willing to accept responsibility for his choices. He does not deny his relationship with Sydney, and he does not apologize for caring about her. At the same time, he continues doing his job as president. This balance becomes one of the most important lessons Andrew learns throughout the story. He realizes that leadership is not about choosing between personal happiness and professional responsibility. The real challenge is learning how to handle both honestly. AJ McInerney continues to stand beside Andrew during the final stage of the campaign. Their friendship has survived disagreements and political pressure, and AJ has gained a deeper understanding of his friend's choices. He still worries about the election, but he now recognizes that Andrew's willingness to take risks is part of what makes him a strong leader. The two friends reflect on everything that has happened. Andrew knows that AJ was right to warn him about the political consequences of his relationship with Sydney. But Andrew also believes that AJ was wrong to assume that protecting the presidency should always come before protecting his personal happiness. Their conversation is not really about who was right or wrong. It is about the fact that both men were trying to protect something they valued. AJ wanted to protect Andrew's presidency. Andrew wanted to protect his principles and the people he loved. In the end, both motivations came from loyalty. Sydney, meanwhile, begins to feel more comfortable with her place in Andrew's life. She has accepted that she cannot return to the quiet existence she had before meeting him. If Andrew remains president, she will continue facing public attention. If he loses the election, she may still be connected to one of the most recognizable political figures in the country. Either way, their relationship will never be completely private. But Sydney is no longer afraid of that future. She has seen Andrew under enormous pressure and discovered that the man behind the political image is someone she truly loves. The challenges have not destroyed their relationship. Instead, they have shown both of them how serious their feelings are. Andrew also begins thinking about his daughter Lucy's future. He wants Lucy to grow up understanding that her father did not allow political pressure to determine every aspect of his life. He wants her to see that it is possible to be responsible while still being honest about one's emotions. The relationship between Sydney and Lucy becomes a quiet source of happiness for Andrew. He sees them together and realizes that his life has changed in ways he never expected. After losing his wife, he believed that part of his life was over forever. Now he has found a new possibility. For Andrew, this is perhaps the most important victory of the entire story. The election results have not even arrived yet, but Andrew has already gained something that no political opponent can take away from him. He has found hope again. As the campaign reaches its final stage, Andrew prepares for the possibility of either outcome. If he wins, he will continue serving as president and face another term filled with pressure and responsibility. If he loses, he will leave office knowing that he stood by his beliefs and refused to allow fear to control him. This attitude gives Andrew a sense of peace that he did not have at the beginning of the story. The final confrontation with Ramson has also changed the political landscape. Ramson's personal attacks have failed to destroy Andrew's reputation, and the president's response has reminded voters that political disagreements should be based on ideas rather than cruelty. Andrew does not need to become Ramson to defeat him. Instead, he chooses to remain himself. This becomes the true turning point of Andrew's political journey. He understands that the most effective response to negative politics is not always a stronger attack. Sometimes it is the refusal to participate in the same behavior. The election finally arrives. The country waits to see what the voters will decide. Inside the White House, the atmosphere is filled with anticipation. Andrew's staff members are focused on the results while AJ remains close to his friend. Sydney is also waiting, knowing that the outcome could affect the future of their relationship. Andrew, however, remains calm. He has spent so much time worrying about what might happen that he has finally learned to accept uncertainty. He cannot control the voters, he cannot control the media, he cannot control his opponents, but he can control the kind of person he chooses to be. As the results begin coming in, Andrew reflects on the journey that brought him to this moment. He thinks about his late wife, his daughter, his friendship with AJ, and the unexpected relationship that changed his life. He realizes that every experience has shaped the man he is today. The presidency has given him enormous power, but it has also forced him to understand the limits of power. Andrew could not stop the media from attacking Sydney. He could not prevent Rumson from exploiting their relationship. He could not guarantee that every voter would understand his decisions, but he could choose how he responded, and that choice defined him. The final election results are about to determine Andrew's political future, but the emotional journey has already reached its conclusion. Andrew has learned that love and leadership do not have to be enemies. He has learned that principles are meaningless if they disappear whenever they become inconvenient. And he has learned that a person can be powerful without losing compassion. As the final results become clear, Andrew looks toward Sydney with a sense of relief. Whatever happens next, he knows that he no longer has to face the future alone. The man who once believed that his life was defined by the presidency has discovered something far more valuable. He has rediscovered the possibility of love, family, and a future that exists beyond the walls of the White House. And now, with the election behind him, Andrew Shepard is ready to discover what comes next. The story reaches its final moments as President Andrew Shepard faces the conclusion of one of the most difficult periods of his life. The election has tested his leadership, his political judgment, and his personal character. But more importantly, it has forced him to understand what truly matters. Throughout the crisis, Andrew has been caught between two worlds. One is the world of politics, where every decision is measured by polls, headlines, and election results. The other is his private life, where he is simply a father, a friend, and a man who has unexpectedly fallen in love again. By the end of the journey, Andrew realizes that neither side of his life can be completely separated from the other. The attacks from Senator Bob Rumson have ultimately failed to destroy Andrew's reputation. Rumson tried to turn Sydney into a political weakness, hoping that the public would see her as a symbol of everything wrong with the president's judgment. But Andrew's decision to defend Sydney instead of hiding from the controversy has changed the way people see him. Rather than allowing his opponent to define the story, Andrew has taken responsibility for his choices and refused to apologize for being human. His greatest victory is not simply political, it is personal. Andrew has spent years living with the memory of his late wife. After losing her, he devoted himself to raising his daughter Lucy and serving the country. He believed that his life had already taken the shape it was supposed to have. The presidency became his purpose, and his responsibilities became his identity. Sydney's arrival changed that. She reminded him that even someone with enormous responsibilities still has the right to hope for happiness. Sydney, too, has changed. When she first entered Andrew's life, she was an independent woman focused on her environmental work. She had no intention of becoming involved in the complicated world surrounding the president. But her relationship with Andrew forced her to face challenges she could never have imagined. She became the subject of political attacks, media attention, and public judgment. Yet, through all of it, she discovered that her feelings for Andrew were strong enough to survive the pressure. The two now understand that their future will never be ordinary. If Andrew continues as president, their relationship will remain under public attention. Their lives will always involve security, politics, and the constant possibility of scrutiny. But they have learned that the presence of difficulties does not mean a relationship is impossible. It simply means that both people must be willing to face those difficulties together. Andrew's relationship with Lucy also gives the ending a deeper emotional meaning. He is not only thinking about his own happiness, he is thinking about the family he wants to build and the kind of example he wants to set for his daughter. Sydney has earned Lucy's trust naturally, without trying to replace anyone or force herself into their lives. Andrew sees the possibility of a family that is different from the one he once had, but still filled with love. For Andrew, this is a powerful realization. He once believed that moving forward meant leaving his past behind. Now he understands that moving forward does not require forgetting the people or experiences that shaped him. His late wife will always be part of his history, and his love for Sydney does not erase that. Instead, it shows that the human heart is capable of carrying memories while still making room for something new. The political story also reaches its conclusion with Andrew proving that leadership is about more than winning elections. His decisions surrounding the environmental legislation demonstrate that he is willing to take a difficult position when he believes it is right. He refuses to let political pressure determine every choice he makes. Even when his opponents accuse him of acting because of Sydney, Andrew remains confident in his own reasons. This is the lesson that separates him from Senator Rumson. Rumson sees politics primarily as a battle for power. Andrew begins to see it as a responsibility to the people who placed their trust in him. Rumson is willing to use personal attacks to gain an advantage, while Andrew ultimately chooses to defend the idea that public debate should be about principles and policies. The conflict between the two men therefore becomes larger than a simple political rivalry. It becomes a debate about what kind of leadership the country deserves. Andrew does not claim to be perfect. He knows that he has made mistakes and that some of his decisions have created problems. But he also understands that perfection is not the requirement for leadership. What matters is the willingness to accept responsibility, learn from mistakes, and continue moving forward. AJ McInerney remains beside Andrew as the story comes to an end. Their friendship has survived one of the most challenging periods of their lives, and both men have gained a better understanding of each other. AJ has learned that Andrew's personal life cannot always be treated as a political liability. Andrew has learned that AJ's warnings come from genuine concern rather than a desire to control him. Their friendship becomes a reminder that even the most powerful people need someone who can tell them the truth. The White House itself also takes on a different meaning for Andrew. At the beginning, it represents power, responsibility, and isolation. By the end, it has become a place where Andrew understands that his personal life continues to exist alongside his political role. The office may define his public identity, but it does not define his entire existence. The final moments of the story leave Andrew and Sydney looking toward the future with a new sense of confidence. They do not know exactly what will happen next, but they no longer feel the need to predict everything. They have already survived the hardest test their relationship could face.